You can call me Mythweaver, and I want you to hear me out. Imagine for a moment that there is still a way to save the Amazing Spider-Man in the main 616 universe. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen through endless complaints, tears, or criticism alone. The only thing that will make a difference is persistence, patience, and the will to fight back for what this character truly represents. But before we can talk about how to save Spider-Man, we need to take a step back. We need to understand the foundation, his legacy, the characters that surround him, and the storylines that have defined him for generations. Only then can we clear away the misconceptions and see what went wrong, and more importantly, how it can be fixed. Let's begin by looking at the heart of Spider-Man's journey and the truths people often overlook. To those of you with zero tolerance can skip the video to the ending 25 minute of video and can hear the solution. But if you truly want to know the value of this solution, the importance, then watch the full video and grab a popcorn because you aren't leaving this video anytime soon. The rise of the Amazing Spider-Man. When the Amazing Spider-Man swung onto the scene in 1963, it was like a bolt of lightning in the comic book world. A raw, refreshing jolt that Marvel and DC hadn't quite managed before. Peter Parker wasn't some untouchable billionaire like Bruce Wayne, brooding in a mansion, or a mythic god like Thor, wielding cosmic powers. No, Peter was just a scrawny teenager from Queens, juggling overdue rent, dodging bullies at Midtown High, and carrying the crushing weight of guilt over his Uncle Ben's death. He was us, or at least the version of us that fumbled through life's messiness, trying to do the right thing while the world kept throwing punches. That relatability, that human core, gave Spider-Man's stories an emotional punch that hit harder than any supervillain's fist. Take the night. Gwen Stacy died, for instance. It wasn't just a comic book arc, it was a gut-wrenching tragedy that left readers reeling. Gwen, Peter's first great love, wasn't just a damsel in distress. She was vibrant, kind, and real. Someone you could imagine grabbing coffee with. When the Green Goblin threw her off that bridge and Spider-Man's web couldn't save her, it wasn't just a plot twist. It was a seismic shift in superhero storytelling. Fans wept. Letters poured into Marvel, some angry, some heartbroken, because losing Gwen felt personal. Comics weren't supposed to do this. They weren't supposed to make you feel like you'd lost someone you knew, but Spider-Man did, and that's why it shook the industry to its core. Then there's Kraven's Last Hunt, a story that dove headfirst into the kind of psychological darkness most Cape comics tiptoed around. Kraven, the obsessive hunter, didn't just want to beat Spider-Man. He wanted to become him, to crawl inside his skin and prove he was better. When he buried Peter alive and took his place, it wasn't just a battle of fists. It was a haunting exploration of identity, purpose, and mortality. Reading it felt like peering into the abyss of the human psyche, and it left you unsettled in the best way possible. This wasn't just Spidey swinging through New York. It was a story that dared to ask what it meant to keep going when everything felt broken. Even the lighter moments, like Peter's first date with Mary Jane Watson in ASM #42, sparkled with heart and humor. Picture it. Peter, this nerdy kid who's still reeling from heartbreak, expecting some awkward blind date, only to meet MJ, vibrant, witty, and way out of his league. "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot," she says, and you can practically see Peter's jaw drop. That moment wasn't just cute. It was a reminder that even superheroes stumble through love and life, just like we do. MJ brought a warmth and playfulness to Peter's world, grounding him in a way that made every web-slinging adventure feel tethered to something real. These stories weren't just issues you grabbed off a drugstore rack. They were cultural touchstones. Readers didn't just follow Spider-Man, they grew up with him. From the awkward high schooler in the early 60s to the struggling 20-something in the 80s, Peter Parker's life mirrored the messy, beautiful chaos of their own. Every arc, whether it was a heart-shattering loss or a quiet moment of connection, hammered home the same truth. With great power comes great responsibility. It wasn't just a catchphrase, it was a way of life, a reminder that being a hero meant showing up, even when the world felt too heavy. Spider-Man didn't just save New York. He saved us one story at a time, by showing us what it meant to keep swinging forward, no matter what. Characters who shaped mythos. Spider-Man's world wasn't just built on web slinging and villain punching. It was the people around him who gave his story its soul. His supporting cast wasn't just there to fill panels. They were the emotional scaffolding that made Peter Parker's life feel so achingly human. Each character, from frail Aunt May to fiery Mary Jane, wasn't just a sidekick or a plot device. They were the heartbeat of the Amazing Spider-Man, grounding its high-flying hero in a world that felt as real as our own. Take Aunt May, for instance. She wasn't just Peter's kindly old guardian. She was the fragile, loving anchor who kept him tethered to his humanity. Widowed and often sickly, May carried the weight of raising Peter after Uncle Ben's death, pouring every ounce of her heart into him. Her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in Peter's goodness, made her more than a stereotypical worried aunt. Every time Peter slipped out the window as Spider-Man, you could feel the tension. He wasn't just dodging Doc Ock. He was protecting May's fragile world. When she nearly died in ASM #33, 1965, trapped under rubble with Peter desperately lifting machinery to save her, it wasn't just a dramatic moment. It was a raw, primal fear of losing the one person who'd always been there. May's love was Peter's moral compass, a constant reminder of the responsibility he carried. Then there's Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend turned tragic cautionary tale. Harry started as the loyal, slightly awkward rich kid who bonded with Peter over being outsiders at Empire State University. But beneath the surface, Harry was crumbling under the shadow of his father, Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin. His descent into addiction and eventual villainy in arcs like ASM #136-137 1974 wasn't just a soap opera twist, it was a gut punch. Harry's transformation from Peter's brother-in-arms to a broken man wielding his father's goblin gear showed how grief and pressure could twist even the best of us. When Harry donned the goblin mask, it wasn't just a fight. It was Peter battling to save his friend's soul, knowing he might already be too late. Harry's story was a tragedy that hit hard because it felt so real. Friendships fray, people lose their way, and sometimes love isn't enough to pull them back. And let's talk about J. Jonah Jameson, the cigar-chomping, mustache-twirling editor of the Daily Bugle. He was more than a comic foil with a vendetta against Spider-Man. He was a mirror to the world's cynicism. Jonah's crusades against Spidey, blasting him as a menace in every headline, captured the media's love-hate dance with heroes. But Jonah wasn't a caricature. He was complex. His grudging respect for Peter's photojournalism, his flashes of vulnerability like when he funded Spider-Man's suit in ASM #1 only to turn on him, made him feel human. Jonah needed Spider-Man as much as he despised him because Spidey sold papers. Their push and pull was a sharp commentary on how the world chews up its heroes while begging for their protection. But no one shaped Spider-Man's mythos quite like Mary Jane Watson. When she first strutted into Peter's life in ASM #42 1966, with that iconic, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot" line, MJ was the dazzling party girl, confident, flirty, and a little too cool for Peter's nerdy charm. But over time, she became so much more. By the 1980s, MJ wasn't just a love interest. She was Peter's partner, his confidant, the one person who knew he was Spider-Man and loved him anyway. Her evolution was groundbreaking for comics. Unlike the endless will they, won't they teases of other superhero romances, MJ grew alongside Peter. She faced her own struggles, family trauma, a modeling career that never quite took off, and still chose to stand by him. Through symbiotes, goblins, and grief, by the time Peter and MJ tied the knot in the Amazing Spider-Man Annual, #21 1987, it felt like a triumph. Their wedding wasn't just a gimmick, it was a promise that love could endure in a world of chaos. MJ became Peter's rock, the one who patched him up after battles and reminded him who he was when the mask came off. In an era when superhero relationships were often fleeting or tragic, Peter and MJ's marriage was a beacon of stability. Through the 80s and 90s, they faced everything together. Clones, betrayals, even the loss of their unborn child in ASM #418 1996, and their bond held firm. MJ wasn't just the girl next door. She was the heart of Spider-Man's world, proving that even a hero who swings alone needs someone to come home to. These characters didn't just orbit Peter Parker. They shaped him, challenged him, and made his story resonate across decades. They weren't just names on a page. They were the family, friends, and foes who reminded us that Spider-Man's greatest power wasn't his webs or strength, but his ability to keep loving, fighting, and growing, no matter how heavy the world felt. Growth of a hero. Spider-Man's story has always been about growth, not just swinging from skyscrapers or battling villains, but the messy, beautiful human journey of becoming. Unlike so many superheroes frozen in a timeless bubble, Peter Parker wasn't static. He wasn't eternally 25 or perpetually perfect. He evolved, stumbled, and got back up, his life unfolding like a real person's. From a wide-eyed teenager in 1963 to a married man and mentor by the 2000s, Peter's arc in The Amazing Spider-Man wasn't just about saving the day. It was about learning to carry the weight of with great power comes great responsibility while growing into the man behind the mask. In the early days, Peter was a high school kid in Queens, juggling homework, bullies, and the guilt of Uncle Ben's death. Every issue felt like a tightrope walk, scrambling to pay rent for Aunt May, dodging Flash Thompson's taunts, and still finding time to stop the Vulture. But as the years rolled on, Peter didn't stay that awkward teen. By the 1970s, he was a college student at Empire State University, navigating friendships with Harry Osborn and romance with Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane. His struggles grew with him: heartbreak, loss, and the dawning realization that being Spider-Man meant sacrificing parts of himself. When Gwen died in ASM #121-122, it wasn't just a tragedy, it was a turning point. Peter learned that even his best wasn't always enough, and that lesson hardened him, but it also deepened his resolve. By the 1980s, Peter's growth took on new layers. He wasn't just a freelance photographer scraping by for the Daily Bugle anymore. He was a man wrestling with love and commitment. His marriage to Mary Jane in The Amazing Spider-Man Annual #21 was a milestone that set Spider-Man apart. While other heroes cycled through endless breakups or tragic love stories, Peter and MJ built something real. A partnership that weathered symbiotes, clones, and cosmic threats. Their marriage wasn't perfect. It was raw and honest, full of arguments and reconciliations that made them feel like a couple you might know. Peter wasn't just growing up, he was building a life. When J. Michael Straczynski, JMS, took the reins in the 2000s, he pushed Peter into bold, uncharted territory while keeping his humanity front and center. In Coming Home, ASM #3035-2001, JMS gave Spider-Man a mythic scope, introducing Ezekiel, a mentor figure who forced Peter to confront the mystical origins of his powers. Was he just a kid bitten by a radioactive spider, or was he part of something bigger, tied to a spider totem destiny? The arc didn't just dazzle with action like Spider-Man's desperate fight against Morlun, a predator who hunted totemic heroes. It dug deep into Peter's soul. Even as he grappled with cosmic questions, he never stopped being the guy who worried about paying bills or protecting MJ. That balance, epic stakes grounded in human fears, made the story soar. JMS also gave us The Conversation, ASM #38-2001, one of the most poignant moments in Spider-Man's history. After decades of hiding his secret identity from Aunt May, Peter finally sat her down and told her the truth. He was Spider-Man. It was a quiet, wrenching scene. No supervillains, no web-slinging, just a nephew bearing his soul to the woman who raised him. May's reaction wasn't anger or shock, but a mix of pride and heartbreak, realizing the burden Peter had carried since he was 15. That moment resolved years of tension, letting Peter shed the guilt of lying to the person he loved most. It was growth in its purest form, not a new power or costume, but a step toward honesty and healing. By the 2000s, Peter wasn't just a hero, he was a mentor. JMS had him take a job as a high school science teacher, a role that felt like a natural evolution. After years of learning from his own mistakes, Uncle Ben's death, Gwen's loss, Harry's downfall, Peter was finally ready to pass on his wisdom. Teaching wasn't just a job, it was a way for him to give back. to guide kids the way he'd once needed guidance. Watching him inspire students while still dodging Doc Ock or juggling MJ's modeling career was peak Spider-Man. Big heart, bigger responsibilities, and never enough hours in the day. For decades, The Amazing Spider-Man wasn't just a superhero comic. It was the story of a man growing through life's highs and lows. Peter learned from every failure, every loss, every hard-won victory. He carried the weight of his choices from the night he let a burglar run past him to the moment he slipped a ring on MJ's finger. The series balanced heart-pounding action, think Spidey versus Venom, or the Green Goblin's latest scheme, with the quiet moments that made Peter real. Late-night talks with MJ, joking with the Human Torch, or just sitting on a rooftop, mask off, wondering if he was doing enough. That's what made Spider-Man timeless. He wasn't just a hero swinging through New York. He was a guy trying to figure out life, one web at a time, showing us that growing up is the greatest adventure of all. The downfall of the Amazing Spider-Man. Spider-Man's story has always been a roller coaster of heart and heroism, but some moments hit so hard they left fans shattered. Not just because of what happened to Peter Parker, but because of what it meant for the bond between readers and the world they'd invested in for decades. The most gut-wrenching of these was One More Day, One More Day. A storyline that didn't just break Peter's world, it broke the trust of countless fans who'd grown up with him. In One More Day, Peter faced an impossible choice. Aunt May was dying, shot by a sniper targeting Spider-Man after he revealed his identity during Civil War. Desperate to save her, Peter and Mary Jane were approached by Mephisto, Marvel's equivalent of the devil, who offered a deal. He'd save May's life, but in exchange, their marriage, their love, their shared history would be erased from existence. Peter and MJ, after agonizing over the decision, agreed. In a flash, their 20-year marriage, built through trials like the Clone Saga, the loss of their unborn child, and countless battles, was wiped away. Peter woke up single, living with Aunt May. His life reset to a bachelor's existence. The world moved on as if Peter and MJ had never tied the knot. For fans, this wasn't just a plot twist. It was a betrayal. Peter and MJ's relationship wasn't some fleeting comic book romance. It was the emotional cornerstone of The Amazing Spider-Man. Since their wedding in 1987, ASM Annual #21, they'd been a team, facing everything from Venom's rage to personal heartbreaks with a love that felt real, flawed, and enduring. Readers had grown up alongside them through high school crushes, college heartaches, and adult struggles, cheering their milestones and mourning their losses. MJ wasn't just Peter's wife, she was his partner, the one who knew his secret and chose to stand by him. Erasing that didn't just undo a marriage, it unraveled decades of character growth that had made Spider-Man more than a superhero. He was a man whose life mirrored our own messy journeys. What stung most was how One More Day felt like an editorial mandate, not a story driven by character. Unlike organic tragedies like Gwen Stacy's death in ASM #121-122, which flowed from the Green Goblin's cruelty and Peter's limitations, this felt artificial. A top-down decision to reset Spider-Man to a younger, single status quo. Fans knew Marvel's reasoning. Editors believed a married Peter was too old for new readers, but it came at the cost of the story's heart. Letters flooded in, forums lit up, and longtime readers voiced their grief and anger. Some felt robbed of the couple they'd rooted for since MJ's Face It Tiger debut in 1966. Others saw it as a sign that Marvel valued marketability over storytelling, that editorial whims could trump the organic growth they'd cherished. The fallout was more than a changed continuity. It was a fractured trust. Fans who'd stuck with Spider-Man through decades of highs and lows realized their investment could be erased in a single stroke. One More Day didn't just break Peter and MJ apart. It left a scar on the series, a reminder that even the most human hero could be reshaped by forces beyond his control. For many, it wasn't just the loss of a marriage. It was the loss of a story they'd believed in, one that had taught them that love, like responsibility, was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Character assassination. The fallout from One More Day didn't just unravel Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson's marriage. It set off a slow, painful erosion of the Amazing Spider-Man's heart and soul, particularly its rich supporting cast. What made Spider-Man's world so special was how its characters, flawed, human, and deeply interconnected, grew alongside Peter, reflecting his struggles and triumphs. But in the years that followed, Marvel's editorial choices often seemed to prioritize shock value and forced drama over the organic storytelling that had defined the series. The result was a kind of character assassination, where beloved figures like Mary Jane, Harry Osborn, Norman Osborn, and Felicia Hardy were written inconsistently, sidelined, or warped into versions that felt unrecognizable to fans who'd invested decades in their story. Mary Jane Watson. Let me tell you something about Mary Jane Watson, a character who once stood as one of the strongest, most iconic women in comic book history, and how over the years, thanks to short-sighted editorial decisions, she has been reduced to little more than a shadow of herself. What Marvel did to her wasn't just poor writing, it was deliberate, calculated character assassination. And if you followed Spider-Man's story long enough, you know exactly what I mean. When Mary Jane first stepped into the pages of Amazing Spider-Man in 1966, she wasn't just the hot girl next door. Her introduction was playful, sure, that legendary line, "Face it, Tiger, you just hit the jackpot." But beneath the charm, Stan Lee and later Jerry Conway began to peel back her layers. What we found was a young woman who wore a mask just like Peter Parker did. Her mask wasn't spandex, it was a smile, a carefree attitude, a refusal to let anyone see the pain she carried inside. Because behind that playful exterior, Mary Jane was a survivor. She grew up with an abusive father, a fractured home, a life that could have broken her spirit. But instead of succumbing to bitterness, she turned her pain into strength, hiding her scars behind wit and independence. Over time, that depth made her something more than just another love interest. After Gwen Stacy's death, she didn't just comfort Peter, she became the one person who truly understood him. By the late 1970s and into the 80s, Mary Jane Watson wasn't a supporting character anymore. She was Peter's equal, his anchor, his partner in every sense of the word. And when they married in the 1980s, it wasn't a gimmick. It was the natural conclusion to years of growth, both hers and Peter's. Fans wanted it, the story demanded it, and for once, Marvel actually let their characters evolve. Mary Jane represented something rare in superhero comics. The idea that growth and responsibility could extend to love. That a superhero could have a partner who wasn't just in the way or a damsel in distress, but someone who stood beside him, challenged him, and helped him carry the unbearable weight of being Spider-Man. She was never meant to be perfect, she was meant to be real. Flawed, yes, but resilient. But then came the editors. And this is where the story shifts from inspiration to tragedy. Marvel's editorial machine began to see Mary Jane not as a character, but as a problem. Joe Quesada and others decided that a married Spider-Man was bad for business. They claimed it made Peter look old, less relatable to new readers. They argued that having a perfect wife removed all the tension from the story. But these excuses fell apart under scrutiny. Because Mary Jane was never just the perfect wife. She was layered. She had her own struggles, her own independence. The problem wasn't her, the problem was the lack of imagination in the writing. Instead of asking themselves, what stories can we tell about a married Spider-Man? They chose the lazy route, erase the marriage and tear her character down. And so began the butchering. The most infamous moment, of course, being One More Day in 2007. In that single story, decades of growth were erased. Peter and Mary Jane's marriage, their history, their bond, everything they had built together wiped away by a deal with Mephisto. Not because the characters wanted it, not because the story demanded it, but because editorial decided it had to be that way. Overnight, Mary Jane was no longer Peter's partner, no longer his confidant, no longer the person who carried him through grief and reminded him of who he was. She was shoved back into the role of will they or won't they, as if the last 20 years of storytelling had never existed. But Marvel didn't stop there. They doubled down on her destruction. In recent years, Zeb Wells' Amazing Spider-Man run pushed her character assassination to its lowest point. Suddenly, Mary Jane was living with a man named Paul, raising children that weren't hers, and treating Peter like a distant memory. She wasn't written as the loyal, resilient woman fans had known for decades. She was written as someone cold, indifferent, even dismissive of Peter's struggles. As if the woman who once promised Peter that he'd never have to carry his burdens alone had just abandoned him without explanation. Fans were outraged, and rightfully so. Not because they demanded Mary Jane owe Peter something, but because this portrayal contradicted everything she had ever stood for. And on top of that, Marvel dragged her into a tired cycle of damsel-in-distress plots. Once a proactive, independent character who could stare down villains and support Peter emotionally, she became nothing more than a prop-a-pawn to be kidnapped, manipulated, or dangled in front of Spider-Man to generate cheap drama. They stripped her of agency and rewrote her into something unrecognizable. What was Mary Jane meant to be? She was meant to embody growth, loyalty, and resilience. A woman who overcame her trauma, chose to stand beside a man who carried the weight of the world, and proved that superheroes could grow into love without losing storytelling depth. What has she become? A tool for editorial resets, a scapegoat for the single Peter agenda, a character thrown under the bus to preserve the illusion of a perpetually young, perpetually miserable Spider-Man. That is true character assassination. Taking everything she was, her loyalty, her growth, her resilience, and twisting it into abandonment, erasure, and stagnation. Erasing decades of progress, not because it made sense, but because editors refused to let Spider-Man evolve. The very theme of Spider-Man, the idea of responsibility, was betrayed. Responsibility means accepting growth, accepting change, facing the consequences of your choices. Instead, Marvel's editorial chose irresponsibility, shortcuts, erasures, and destruction of their most important relationship. And the result? Mary Jane Watson's reputation is fractured. New readers don't know who she really is, and old readers feel betrayed, watching the woman who once symbolized loyalty and strength reduced to a narrative punching bag. Spider-Man's legacy, which once stood for growth and responsibility, now feels hollow. The editors didn't just destroy Mary Jane. They destroyed what she represented, the proof that a hero could grow up and still remain compelling. Mary Jane Watson was meant to be more than just Peter Parker's love interest. She was meant to be his partner, his equal, his family. She was meant to show us that even superheroes deserve to grow, to love, to build something lasting. But thanks to years of editorial interference, she has been assassinated, her history erased, her character warped, her legacy butchered, and that is the real tragedy of Marvel's modern Spider-Man. Fans weren't angry because they couldn't handle change. They were furious because the Paul storyline seemed designed to shock rather than to honor MJ's character. The MJ who told Peter, "I'm with you, Tiger, no matter what," through every crisis was reduced to a plot device for cheap drama. Her decision to stay with Paul, even after returning to Earth 616, felt like a rejection of everything fans loved about her loyalty and strength. Social media and forums like Reddit's /r/Spider-Man lit up with frustration, with posts calling Paul Marvel's most hated character, and memes mocking his existence. The backlash wasn't just about shipping Peter and MJ. It was about a character who'd been a pillar of the series being diminished to serve an editorial mandate that prioritized resetting Peter's status quo over respecting her arc. But MJ wasn't alone in this erosion. Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend whose tragic descent into villainy and death in Spectacular Spider-Man #200 was a defining moment, was brought back in Amazing Spider-Man #509 with little purpose. His resurrection felt like a cash grab, undermining the emotional weight of his original arc. Harry's struggles with addiction, his father's legacy, and his love for Peter made him a complex, heartbreaking figure. Bringing him back as a clone or a pawn in various schemes diluted that depth, turning a once poignant tragedy into a recycled plot point. Fans who'd mourned Harry felt like his return cheapened one of Spider-Man's most powerful stories. Even Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, wasn't spared. Known for her fierce independence and complex chemistry with Peter, Felicia was often thrown into romances with him to stir drama, especially post One More Day. In stories like Amazing Spider-Man #681 or Zeb Wells' run, her relationship with Peter felt forced, less about their shared history and more about filling the MJ-shaped hole in his life. Felicia's own arc, her growth from a thrill-seeking thief to a layered anti-hero, was sidelined to prop up Peter's romantic woes, reducing her to a plot device rather than a character with her own agency. This pattern of character assassination wasn't just about bad writing. It was about a fundamental shift in how Marvel approached the Amazing Spider-Man. The series had thrived on characters who grew, loved, and lost alongside Peter, their arcs weaving a tapestry of human connection. But post One More Day, editorial choices seemed to favor short-term shocks over long-term storytelling. MJ's sidelining, Harry's pointless resurrection, Norman's bizarre redemption, and Felicia's forced romances weren't just missteps. They were betrayals of the growth in humanity that made Spider-Man's world resonate. Fans didn't just lose their favorite characters. They lost faith in a series that had once felt like a second home, where every web-slinging adventure was grounded in the heart of the people Peter fought for. Downfall of the storytelling. From the very beginning, ASM was about growth. Peter aged, he went through school, faced heartbreak, carried guilt over Uncle Ben's death, and learned that heroism wasn't glamorous, it was sacrifice. Every issue, every storyline built upon the last. Gwen Stacy's death wasn't just shock value, it was a turning point that changed Peter forever. And when Mary Jane entered his life as a true partner, the series showed something almost unheard of in superhero comics: progression. The boy grew into a man, the hero grew into a husband, and Spider-Man proved that evolution could exist in a medium built on endless cycles. For decades, ASM told stories that mattered. Writers like Jerry Conway, Roger Stern, and J.M. DeMatteis elevated the book into one of the most respected comics of all time. Peter fought not only villains like the Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus, but his own insecurities, his finances, and the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just about the mask, it was about the man beneath it. That's why the stories resonated. Fans didn't follow Spider-Man just for the fights. They followed because Peter Parker felt real. And at its best, The Amazing Spider-Man was the perfect blend of tragedy, resilience, humor, and heart. But then came the slow unraveling. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened because of editorial decisions that prioritized short-term gimmicks over long-term storytelling. The crack started in the 1990s during the infamous Clone Saga. Instead of trusting the natural growth of the series, Marvel panicked about keeping Spider-Man fresh. The result was a convoluted mess where Peter might not be the real Spider-Man, Ben Reilly was shoved into the spotlight, and years of continuity nearly collapsed under the weight of editorial interference. Though the story eventually limped to an end, the damage was done. Trust between Marvel and the readers began to fracture. But nothing compared to 2007, when Joe Quesada and Marvel Editorial unleashed One More Day. That storyline was the knife in the back of everything the Amazing Spider-Man had built for over 40 years. In one stroke, they erased Peter's marriage to Mary Jane, rewrote decades of growth, and forced Spider-Man back into a perpetual state of stagnation. And why? Because the editors believed that a married Spider-Man was too old, too unrelatable, and that readers couldn't identify with a hero who had grown up. Instead of respecting the very theme that defined Peter Parker's responsibility, facing the consequences of choices, Marvel chose the path of irresponsibility, a demonic reset button. After One More Day, The Amazing Spider-Man became something hollow. The book stopped being about Peter Parker's growth and instead became about preserving a never-ending cycle of misery. The editors forced him back into the role of a lonely, broke, perpetually unlucky man-child, as if no progress could ever be allowed. And instead of compelling drama, we got cheap gimmicks reboots, relaunches, constant #1 issues, constant crossovers. The focus shifted from storytelling to marketing, and Spider-Man, once Marvel's most relatable hero, became a product stuck in place, never allowed to truly live. And then came the final insult in recent years. Under Zeb Wells' run, ASM reached new lows. In 2022, Marvel relaunched the series yet again with no explanation. No setup, just a broken Peter Parker, hated by his friends, alienated from everyone, and worst of all, separated from Mary Jane once more. But this time, the editors didn't just keep them apart, they humiliated both characters. Suddenly, MJ was living with another man, Paul, and raising children that weren't hers, while Peter was written as desperate, pitiful, and isolated. The Spider-Man who once stood for resilience was turned into a punchline, a man defined not by responsibility but by endless failure. The title that once defined Marvel's greatness had become its biggest embarrassment. And what was lost in all of this wasn't just Mary Jane or Peter, it was the very identity of the Amazing Spider-Man. Once upon a time, this series was about growth. It was about showing that a young man could stumble, could fall, could suffer loss, but could still rise stronger, wiser, and better. Today, ASM has been reduced to a hamster wheel, spinning endlessly but going nowhere. Peter Parker isn't allowed to grow up, isn't allowed to succeed, isn't allowed to have lasting love or family. Because the editors don't want him to be human, they want him to be a mascot they can repackage endlessly. The most gut-wrenching wound in the Amazing Spider-Man's modern era isn't just the loss of beloved characters or the shift toward gimmicky events. It's the relentless regression of Peter Parker and his world. Spider-Man was once defined by growth, by a hero who stumbled, learned, and moved forward through life's triumphs and tragedies. Peter aged from a nervous teenager to a college student, a husband, a teacher, even a leader among the Avengers. His journey mirrored our own, messy, painful, but always pushing towards something better. Yet, in recent years, Marvel's editorial choices have trapped him in a perpetual state of arrested development, broke, alone, and irresponsible, as if he's forever 22. This isn't just a creative misstep, it's a betrayal of everything Spider-Man stood for, and it's left fans grieving for the hero they watched grow up. That is the true character assassination of the Amazing Spider-Man. A book that was once the most honest, most human, most inspiring title in comics has been strangled by an obsession with keeping Peter forever young, forever miserable, forever stuck in the past. The tragedy isn't that Spider-Man suffers. Suffering has always been part of his story. The tragedy is that now, his suffering has no purpose, no growth, no resolution, just an endless loop dictated by editorial fear. And the worst part? Readers can feel it. They see the emptiness. Sales decline, fan trust erodes, and yet Marvel refuses to listen. Instead of letting Spider-Man evolve naturally, as he was always meant to, they keep dragging him backward, erasing his milestones, killing his relationships, and stripping away everything that once made him a symbol of responsibility. The Amazing Spider-Man was supposed to be the story of a boy becoming a man, of a hero learning what it truly means to carry power and sacrifice. Today, it has become the story of a corporation afraid of change, afraid of growth, afraid of letting Peter Parker live. And in doing so, they didn't just destroy a character, they destroyed a legacy. Meet the criminals behind. Editors like Joe Quesada and Nick Lowe, along with writers like Zeb Wells and others, have been at the center of controversial decisions, most notably One More Day and the Paul storyline, that have alienated fans and sparked accusations of character assassination. The root issue isn't just individual creative choices, but a top-down philosophy that keeps Peter Parker frozen in a state of perpetual youth, ignoring the growth that made him resonate with readers for decades. Compounding this is a dismissive attitude from Marvel's editorial team, who often label fan criticism as toxic fandom, rather than engaging with it, even as sales decline and trust erodes. Let's break down the key players, their decisions, and the evidence of their impact, drawing from fan reactions, industry reports, and editorial statement. It started with Joe Quesada, the architect of One More Day in 2007, who erased Peter and MJ's marriage because he thought a married Spider-Man was too old and unrelatable. When we pushed back, 78% of fans rejecting the story in a 2008 Wizard magazine poll. He didn't engage. In a 2009 Comic Book Resources column, he waved off the outrage, saying, "Fandom has managed to move on. What's important is how we move forward," as if our attachment to Peter and MJ's bond was something to get over. He claimed he did it with the fans in mind to tell incredible Spidey stories, yet ignored our complaints on early forums that Peter and MJ's love was Spider-Man's soul. This kind of dismissal set an aggravating tone, making it seem like our input was irrelevant to his plans. Nick Lowe, executive editor since 2007, has amplified this frustration, often responding in ways that feel mocking. In ASM #57, 2024, a fan wrote a letter from New Zealand asking for a one more day retcon and pointing out how the series had regressed Peter since 2008. Lowe's reply was pointed. "I've come to think that Spider-Man growing, aging, and developing his life isn't the way to go. It's bold to claim that your view is one representing multiple millions of fans' viewpoint. This came across as belittling, labeling our concerns as overreaching. Fans on X pointed it out as gaslighting, and hashtags demanding change gained traction. At NYCC 2024, Lowe addressed questions about Kamala Khan's death in ASM #26, 2023, and the Paul arc, where MJ was paired with a new character. Reports described his response as passive-aggressive defensiveness, avoiding real discussion. His X posts add to the irritation. When Ultimate Spider-Man launched in 2024 with a married Peter, Lowe, quote, tweeted a Marvel post with a sarcastic, "They're doing what in Ultimate Spider-Man?" Fans took it as a dig at our calls for similar growth in the 616 universe, with replies noting, "They're doing what 616 should have done decades ago." In a 2023 Popverse interview, Lowe acknowledged ASM #26 would cause backlash, joking that writer Zeb Wells shouldn't attend conventions, yet went ahead with it, treating our reactions like expected noise rather than valid feedback. C.B. Cebulski, editor-in-chief, since 2017, adds to the annoyance through his lack of response, staying silent when he could address issues. When fans on X pushed to retcon one more day after the Paul arc in 2022 to 2023, Cebulski didn't comment, unlike his active promotion of X-Men or Avengers. At C2E2 2023, he called keeping Peter and MJ apart an editorial preference, not a mandate, saying, "In 2 years or 5 years, something could change. It's just where the story takes us." This non-committal answer offered little substance, sidestepping our requests for concrete shifts while ASM's sales dropped to 40,000 to 50,000 units in 2023 Comic-Con, compared to Ultimate Spider-Man's 70,000 unit debut. His silence on petitions like a 2023 Change.org campaign with thousands of signatures calling for Lowe and Wells' removal feels like a disregard for our efforts. Tom Brevoort, Senior Vice President and Executive Editor, contributes to the frustration with responses that come off as condescending. In a 2023 Substack post, he defended the Clone Conspiracy, 2016, which turned Ben Reilly into a villain, as necessary for dramatic stakes, overlooking fans' complaints on Reddit about it being more regression. In a 2024 Substack Q&A, when asked if Ultimate Spider-Man's success with a married Peter could influence 616 to reunite him with MJ, he dismissed it. "Heroes with kids don't sell." Fans on X responded with sarcasm, noting how it echoed old excuses. At Baltimore Comic-Con 2024, he addressed a question about Peter and MJ with, "He can get back with Mary Jane, he just can't actually tie the knot," which contradicted Cebulski's no mandate line and shut down discussion. When a fan on Blue Sky in March 2025 suggested reuniting Peter and MJ to boost sales, Brevoort replied sharply, "You seriously think that if there was an easy way to make sales skyrocket, I wouldn't do it? Or that I'm lying about information that I have access to and you certainly do not?" This tone, treating us as uninformed, ignores Ultimate Spider-Man's 70,000 unit sales, showing demand for a mature Peter. Zeb Wells, writer of ASM 2022 to 2024, heightens the irritation by framing controversial arcs as bold moves without addressing the fallout. His Paul arc, ASM #114 2022 to 2023, placed MJ in another dimension with Paul Rabin, and ASM #26 2023 killed Kamala Khan for impact. Fans on X and Reddit labeled Paul the worst arc in years, with hashtags calling for change. In a 2023 Popverse interview, Wells described Paul as a way to shake things up, saying it explored new sides of MJ, but fans viewed it as ignoring her character, calling it a cheap shock. His X tweet, promoting ASM #26, Big Changes for Spidey, prompted replies branding it Big Betrayals. At a 2023 convention, reports noted, Wells sidestepped Paul questions with a casual, "I'm just following orders," shifting blame to Lowe without taking ownership. This approach leaves us feeling overlooked, as if our attachment to the characters is secondary to generating buzz. This pattern, from Quesada's brush-off of One More Day's backlash, Lowe's mocking letter and tweets, Cebulski's silence, Brevoort's condescending Substack posts, and Wells's casual defenses, has eroded our trust. We're not overreacting. We're the core of Spider-Man, and we've shown it. ASM's 40,000 to 50,000 units in 2023 lagged behind Ultimate Spider-Man's 70,000, indicating demand for a Peter who grows. Yet Marvel relies on pre-orders and variant covers, overlooking our campaigns to let Peter grow. The current
2025 run is good. It's healing ASM. It's undoing Zeb Wells' mess. MJ broke up with Paul. Maybe we're finally seeing flickers of the classic Spider-Man again.
You don't get it, do you? How many times have they done this? How many times have they dangled this bait in front of you, only to snatch it away the moment sales stabilize? You complain about how they made Peter and MJ toxic, how they dragged the story into misery. But you fail to see the real toxicity. The toxic relationship isn't between Peter and MJ. The toxic relationship is between you and the editors, and you need to get out. Let me explain this clearly. It is never going to heal. The character you loved, the flawed, resilient Peter Parker who grew into a man, who earned respect, who stood beside MJ as a partner. That character has been gutted since 2007. And what happened after One More Day? Fans were outraged. You'd think Marvel would listen. Instead, they mocked you. Brevoort dismissed complaints. Editors called you man-children who don't understand storytelling. Quesada smirked through interviews as if he'd done something brave. Nick Lowe still parrots the same nonsense. They didn't respect your voice then, and they don't respect it now. But here's the cruelest part. Every few years, they bait you. After One More Day, they rolled out Brand New Day, promising fresh, bold stories. What was it? Disposable gimmicks. Peter dating random women, job hopping, regressing to a man-child. Then came Spider Island, a temporary high, nothing lasting. Then, Superior Spider-Man. Remember that? Peter dead, Doc Ock in his body. Fans told this was bold innovation. And when backlash rose, Marvel dangled hope again. Don't worry, Peter's coming back. And you bought in. Then came Renew Your Vows. Remember that one? A world where Peter and MJ were married with a daughter. Fans loved it, sales spiked. And what did Marvel do? They admitted it was just a bone thrown to keep marriage fans quiet. Brevoort himself said it was never meant to last. They literally said it was a side project to placate you, while the main book continued to erase everything you cared about. And you still gave them money. Fast forward. Zeb Wells' run, maybe the most hated ASM era in decades. What did Marvel do when the backlash became unavoidable? Did they change leadership? Did they admit their mistake? No. They pulled the same playbook they always do. They break up MJ and Paul. They tease flickers of reconciliation. They act like they're listening again. Just like they did after One More Day. Just like they did with Renew Your Vows. Just like they do every single time sales start bleeding. And here you are, falling for it again. Like an ex who abuses you, manipulates you, then comes crawling back with sweet words when they're lonely. Marvel is playing you the same way. They use your nostalgia, your hope, your love for Spider-Man to squeeze out sales spikes whenever things look bad. And the moment sales steady, they'll pull the rug out again. Back to status quo, back to misery, back to editors laughing at you while you bankroll the insult. Can't you see? They don't care about you. They spit on your opinions. They mock you on Twitter. They mock you in interviews. They openly say they don't want to give you what you've been asking for since 2007. And still, you give them money. Still, you reward them for disrespecting you. This is the dumbest relationship I've ever seen. You're not just being ignored. You're being toyed with, disrespected, and then robbed. And some of you even call that hope. Do you honestly believe that under these editors, under this same leadership that gave you One More Day, you will ever get the Spider-Man you want? If you do, then this video isn't for you. You can leave now, wait for the bait to hit again, and let them laugh at you behind the curtain. But if you see the pattern, if you finally see it for what it is, you'll know the truth. It's never going to heal, not until they undo one more day completely. Not until they erase Paul. Not until they purge the editorial rot that keeps mocking you while pocketing your cash. Until then, you're just letting the abuser back in every time they knock on the door. Can we save the amazing Spider-Man? So now we've gone through the legendary history of Spider-Man. We've revisited the real, iconic Mary Jane and the other core characters who gave this story its soul. And we've also faced the uncomfortable truth, how they were slowly stripped down, misrepresented, and in some cases outright assassinated in character. In other words, we've examined the patient, we've identified the disease, and we've pointed to the viruses that infected and poisoned the heart of Spider-Man's narrative. But here's the thing, we can't stop there. Diagnosis without treatment is meaningless. If we truly care about this character and this world, we need to take it one step further. Now it's time to talk about the cure. Now it's time to discuss the solution. The way Spider-Man can be restored, rebuilt, and brought back to what he was always meant to stand. First, we need to recognize something crucial. We haven't been giving the amazing Spider-Man the right kind of medicine. We've been treating the symptoms, not the root cause. One of the most common medicines we've tried is backlash. The outrage, the complaints, the petitions, the constant voices calling out the flaws and demanding change. And while backlash is powerful, while it shows the passion of the fans, it isn't enough. Because here's the reality, backlash doesn't always land the way we think it does. It doesn't shake the editors or the writers the way we hope it will. In fact, sometimes it has the opposite effect. To them, it's just noise, something they can tune out or even use to justify doubling down. Which raises the question, if backlash alone doesn't work, then what is the other, more vital medicine that's missing? To find that answer, we have to go deeper. We have to step back and look at the bigger picture. We need to connect the dots between every instance of character assassination, every poorly handled downfall, every storyline that felt like a betrayal rather than an evolution. Because all of these things, every crack, every collapse, trace back to one central problem. And once we uncover that, then we'll finally understand how to cure Spider-Man's world, why the backlash doesn't affect them. And what is the real medicine? After all the backlash, after decades of fans pouring out their hearts and giving feedback, why has everything only gotten worse? Why do editors and writers dismiss the criticism as nothing more than the noise of a so-called minority? Let's find out. The truth is simple but uncomfortable. The downfall of Marvel Comics, and even the cracks we're now seeing in the MCU, began when they started prioritizing one thing above all else: sales, money, and profit. The legacy, the fans, the vision that Stan Lee and others built, it was pushed aside. No matter how much we protested, no matter how much passion or backlash we gave, they wouldn't listen. Because in their eyes, it didn't matter. As long as the numbers looked good, as long as the money kept flowing, they were satisfied. This is why the legacy rotted. This is why characters were twisted, assassinated, and turned into shells of themselves. This is why storylines collapsed into disappointments rather than triumphs. And this is why editors and writers who fail to honor the core of these characters remain in their positions. Because it all connects back to one thing: sales, money, profit. That is the chain holding Spider-Man and the entire Marvel Universe hostage. How sales work in comics.
Okay, genius Mythweaver, what's your magnificent plan to save them? Because whether you like it or not, Marvel is still ranked high. They're still earning profits, pulling in big numbers. So why would they ever change?
Don't worry. I hear that question all the time, and the answer is simple. We can't build a cure unless we first understand the illusion. We have to look at how their sales machine really works. Because on the surface, it looks strong. It looks untouchable. But beneath that shiny surface is where the truth hides. Marvel has become an expert at masking their profits and manipulating the rankings to make everything seem better than it really is. They know how to push variant covers, endless reboots, flashy crossovers, and temporary shock value to inflate numbers and make it look like the books are thriving. They know how to stretch the short-term hype into the appearance of long-term success. But that doesn't mean the foundation is strong. It means they're hiding the cracks, dressing up weakness as strength. And now, it's time to expose that. To pull back the curtain and show how fragile the system really is, how much of it is smoke and mirrors. Because once we understand how their sales strategy works, then we'll finally see the leverage fans truly hold. Here's the first truth you need to understand. Comic sales are non-returnable. Once a retailer places their order, they're locked in. There's no safety net. And those orders? They aren't based on what fans actually want. They're based on what retailers think they might be able to sell, weeks or even months in advance. That means Marvel gets paid whether you buy the book or not. The voice of the reader doesn't even factor into the system. Now, how do they manipulate that system? Through variants and gimmicks. You've seen it, dozens of covers for a single issue. The Amazing Spider-Man #666 had 145 different covers. 145. And here's where it gets worse. Retailer incentive variants come with insane ratios. Want that special one? 100 variant? That means your local comic shop has to order 100 copies of the regular issue just to qualify for one single variant. Imagine that. A small shop ordering 100 books it might never sell, just to get the one cover a few collectors will pay for. And if those 100 copies don't sell, too bad. The store is stuck with them. Dozens of unsold boxes gathering dust in the back room. And remember, these books are non-returnable. Once the final order cutoff hits, 3 to 4 weeks before release, the store is locked in. If hype fades, if readers lose interest, if backlash kills demand, retailers eat the loss, not Marvel. That's the trap. Marvel gets their profit up front while the shops and fans deal with the fallout. And the numbers prove this has been happening for decades. Back in the 1980s, if a comic sold under 120,000 copies, it risked cancellation. By the 1990s, the benchmark dropped to 60,000. By the 2000s, it fell again to 30,000. Today, the cancellation threshold hovers around 15,000 copies. 15,000. And yet, because of inflated cover prices and variants, Marvel can still paint those numbers as success. Now let's talk sell-through versus sell-in. Sell-in is what Marvel brags about. That's how many copies retailers order. But sell-through, how many actually end up in the hands of real readers, is much lower. Historically, a 50% sell-through was considered break-even. Marvel once boasted 70% sell-through in the 1960s, making them the most efficient publisher. Today, many shops are lucky to break even. Most of the time, they're left with overstock. What happens to those unsold copies? They get dumped into dollar bins, sometimes even 25-cent bins. Books that were hyped up as the biggest event in decades end up being sold for less than a pack of gum. That's not success. That's desperation disguised as strength. And let's not forget the event spikes. Marvel knows exactly how to create short-term boosts. Advertising a shocking death, a relaunch, or a massive crossover. Ultimate Spider-Man #1 in 2025 sold nearly 450,000 copies. Amazing Spider-Man #26 was hyped as the most shocking issue in 50 years. These events grab headlines, force retailers to order big, and make sales charts look incredible. But do they build lasting loyalty? No. They leave fans frustrated, alienated, and emotionally disconnected. They burn bridges for short-term profit. Even Marvel's market share games prove this. In late 2024, Marvel's share dropped, and DC surged ahead. By early 2025, Marvel recovered with a 37.9% market share. But how? Not by restoring faith, not by rebuilding trust. They did it through hype-driven events, through variant overload, through tactics that inflate numbers without fixing the core problem. Fans no longer believe in the product. Meanwhile, new readers, especially younger ones, are priced out. They won't hunt down a comic shop, they won't pay inflated prices for books padded with filler, and they certainly won't commit to an industry drowning in gimmicks. Digital comics could have been the future, but Marvel deliberately delays digital releases to protect the direct market. They're clinging to a system built on retailers' backs, while ignoring the actual readers. So when people point to Marvel's rankings and say, "Look, they're still on top," you need to remember this. Those numbers don't represent us. They don't represent the fans who care about Spider-Man's legacy. They don't represent the readers who cry out when Peter and MJ are torn apart, who shout when character assassination replaces real storytelling. Those numbers represent retailers forced to play a losing game. They represent gimmicks. They represent hype. They represent Marvel feeding its own machine while the foundation crumbles. That's why Backlash feels ignored. Because Marvel doesn't measure success by our voices. They measure it by how many units they can push through the pipeline. As long as that system keeps printing money, they'll keep rotting away Stan Lee's legacy without hesitation. But once you see this clearly, once you understand that the strength is fake, the numbers are inflated, and the foundation is cracking, then you understand the truth. Marvel isn't as invincible as it looks. And when that facade collapses, when the illusions fail to hold, that's when the power shifts. That's when the cure becomes possible. Why retailers still buy ASM comics?
If Spider-Man comics are so bad right now, if retailers are losing money, then why do they still order them? Why don't they just stop?
The answer is simple. Because Spider-Man isn't just any character. He's the crown jewel of Marvel. He's the single most valuable character in their entire library. Don't take my word for it. Forbes, Variety, and countless industry reports all confirm it. Spider-Man alone has generated over $13 billion in worldwide revenue, more than Iron Man, Thor, and even Captain America combined. He is Marvel's #1 moneymaker, the face of the company, the character every kid recognizes on a backpack, a lunchbox, a video game cover. So for retailers, carrying Spider-Man is not optional, it's survival. If a shop doesn't stock the latest amazing Spider-Man, they risk alienating their customers. Fans expect it on the shelves every single month, whether it's good or bad. Because Spider-Man is the superhero people look for. Imagine walking into a comic store and not finding the flagship book of Marvel's most iconic character. It would be like going into McDonald's and them saying, "Sorry, we don't do fries anymore." Customers will leave, and they may never come back. Retailers can't afford that. But here's the catch. Marvel knows this. They exploit it. That's why Spider-Man is loaded with incentive variants, events, and shocking headline issues. Take Amazing Spider-Man #26 for example, billed as the most shocking issue in 50 years with the death of Miss Marvel. Retailers were pressured to order heavily, with 100 incentive covers dangled in front of them. Did readers demand hundreds of copies? No. But did retailers feel forced to buy them just to stay in the game? Absolutely. And here's where the tragedy kicks in. Retailers can't return unsold comics. Once they order them, they're stuck. So when they chase those variants, when they stock Spider-Man out of obligation, they're left holding boxes of unsold issues. Some stores openly admit that only 20–40% of their Marvel orders actually sell through, the rest gathering dust. Yet they still keep ordering because Spider-Man is too big to ignore. Think about that. The retailers are losing, but Marvel still wins. Why? Because Marvel doesn't count readers in their sales numbers. They count orders from retailers. If a shop buys 500 copies and sells only 200, Marvel still reports 500 as the sales figure. That's how Spider-Man stays at the top of the charts, even if fewer and fewer people are actually reading the book. So why do retailers keep ordering? Because Spider-Man is a giant. Because Spider-Man is Marvel's golden goose. Because not ordering him is like signing their own death warrant in a competitive market. They're trapped in a system where carrying Spider-Man is mandatory, even if it means bleeding money. And that's the truth the critics don't want to admit. Spider-Man's sales today aren't a reflection of love for the stories. They're a reflection of how much Marvel exploits the retailers who can't afford to drop him. The fans aren't being heard. The retailers are being squeezed. And the legacy of Stan Lee's greatest creation is being traded for quick profits. That's the reality. So what's the plan? How can we save ASM? So now the plan is clear. And it's not complicated. It's brutally simple. Even Tom Brevoort himself, one of Marvel's highest editors, admitted it. Sales are the only language they listen to. You can cry, you can complain online, you can write essays and hashtags. It doesn't matter. The only thing that cuts through the noise is money, and that's exactly where we hit them. The answer? Stop buying Amazing Spider-Man. Boycott it completely. Leave it on the shelves. Let the sales collapse. Let the rankings crash. Because only then, only when their golden goose stops laying eggs, will they finally be forced to listen. But here's the trap you must resist. Marvel will bait you. They always do. They'll throw Peter and MJ reunion teasers, fake romantic covers, a shocking death, or some headline like, the most important issue in 50 years. They've done it before. Fans rush back, the issue spikes in sales. Marvel pats themselves on the back, and then they burn us again with the same tired misery, the same broken characters, the same cheap tricks. Don't fall for it, not once. Not until they undo one more day and erase Paul from existence. That is the line. And for those who still say, but I'll stick with Spider-Man in his darkest times. No, you won't. Because by buying Amazing Spider-Man right now, you're not helping him. You're funding the very people who are destroying him. Every dollar you hand over is fuel for more character assassination, more humiliation, more betrayal of everything Stan Lee and Steve Ditko built. If you want to honor Spider-Man, if you truly want to save him, then the only way to help him is to walk away from ASM until they fix it. That is the real act of loyalty. And let's not forget the retailers. They are the ones Marvel manipulates hardest. They're pressured to buy hundreds of copies for one shiny variant, stuck with piles of unsold books, bleeding money, while Marvel brags about top 10 sales. That system only survives if retailers keep playing along. So here's the advice to every shop. Stop ordering ASM in bulk. Don't take the bait. Don't let Marvel hold you hostage with Spider-Man's name. Instead, put your money into comics that actually respect the character. Ultimate Spider-Man, or classic reprints, or any storyline where Peter, MJ, and his legacy still exist. Reward good storytelling, not corporate sabotage. The truth is simple. Marvel only speaks sales. So let's speak to them in their own language. Abandon ASM. Let the numbers sink. Force them to face the reality they've been dodging for decades. Only then will they realize we are not the minority. We are the majority. And we will not pay for their destruction of Spider-Man anymore. My final message. I know this plan might sound difficult. I know it asks for patience, sacrifice, and discipline. But you need to understand something. Holding on to false hope is not saving Spider-Man. It's hurting you. It's hurting the fandom. But if we don't take action, they will keep ruining Spider-Man. Nothing will change. But here's the truth. Change never comes overnight. It takes time. If we follow this plan together, if we give Spider-Man this medicine, he will heal. 1, maybe 2 years. That's all it would take for Marvel to feel the crash. That's all it would take for them to realize they can't play us anymore. When we were children, Spider-Man was our hero. He inspired us, gave us hope, and showed us responsibility. But now the roles have reversed. Now it's our turn to be his heroes. Now it's our job to save him. And make no mistake, the editors will never respect you. They've said it to your face. They've called your backlash a minority. They've mocked you, laughed at you, and deliberately ruined the stories you love. They destroyed everything, and they must pay for that. And they will pay if we follow through. What we demand is simple. Editors and writers who undo one more day, who erase Paul, who allow Spider-Man to grow, to be a father, to lead a family. We demand stories where Peter and Mary Jane's children face new challenges. We demand the continuation of what Stan Lee built, not the corporate sabotage we've been force-fed for years. So reject that verse. Reject that Spider-Man. Reject that Mary Jane. Say it with clarity. That is not our Spider-Man. That is not our MJ. Demand the originals. And to the creators who are listening right now, this is your role in the fight. Build the stories Marvel refuses to give us. Create fan fiction, create art, create comics that honor the Stan Lee version of Spider-Man. Promote his Peter Parker, his Mary Jane. Show the world what they should have been. Outshine the official books until Marvel has no choice but to notice. And to the YouTubers, the influencers, the voices in the fandom, stop giving oxygen to the mainline ASM circus. Stop promoting their bait. Instead, Show people where the real Peter and MJ live. Ultimate Spider-Man, renew your vows, life story. Remind fans that the heart of Spider-Man is alive elsewhere, just waiting to be embraced. And one last thing, stop hating Mary Jane Watson. She's just a character, a victim of the editors who butchered her. Don't waste your hate on her. Put it where it belongs, on the editors and writers who weaponized her against the fans. So share this message, spread it. If you're a creator, make content about it. If you're a fan, talk about it. If you're a YouTuber, turn it into a movement. Because enough is enough. We've been silent too long. It's time to take Spider-Man back. And one more thing, to every fan listening right now, don't just stop with yourself. Go to your local comic shop, talk to your retailer. Tell them, don't waste your money on ASM. Don't let Marvel force you into buying stacks of comics that sit unsold, collecting dust while they push gimmick variants to cover their mistakes. Instead, put your money into alternatives that actually respect Spider-Man's spirit. Ultimate Spider-Man, Renew Your Vows, Life Story, Spider-Girl, even back issues that keep Peter and Mary Jane real. Show retailers that the demand isn't gone. It's simply waiting for the right stories. Because the truth is, retailers are bleeding too. They're forced into buying dozens, even hundreds of copies just to unlock a single variant cover. They don't want that wait, they don't want those losses. They want books that sell naturally, books readers are excited for. When you tell them where the true demand lies, you're not just helping Spider-Man, you're helping your shop survive. So speak to them, advise them, make it clear. We don't want ASM until one more day is undone, until Paul is erased, until Spider-Man is allowed to grow again. Fans, creators, retailers, we all have power here. And if we use it together, we can force change. We can bring back the Spider-Man who inspired us, and we will.